It's not a show of strength, you know. GD is doing it because they're desperate.
Absolute domination of any aspect of public life.
We are missing a strategic coordination.
Is it participation that matters?
That's the future of any opposition party which decides to sign a contract with the devil.
Ivanishvili is making a systemic opposition out of them.
Now comes the question. If Iran and Russia are fighting the same enemy, which enemy is fighting Georgian dream?
Spot on. Hello and welcome to Talk Georgia Question Time with me, Giorgi Rukhadze.
And me, George Melashvili.
This is a special edition of Talk Georgia where we'll be answering your pressing questions about Georgian and regional politics. Normally I do it with Nodar Harshiladze, but occasionally we have different contributors. And
especially when Nodar is kidnapped.
When Nodar is kidnapped by Chinese.
I would not specifically mention by whom, but when Nodar is unavailable, let's say.
And Giorgi is one of our contributors, so we'll do it today with George. Okay, he calls himself George.
Talk Georgia is brought to you by Droeba Media Group, a trusted source of high-quality news and analytical media content.
And by GSAC, a think tank providing comprehensive political analysis of Georgia and wider Black Sea region, also academic and practical training for postgraduate students and mid-career professionals.
So let's get to the questions.
Before we get to the questions, because George is first time on Question Time, so I will say a few words about him and then we can go to the audience. Okay, so Giorgi is a founder and director of Europe-Georgia Institute, EGI in short. And so his interests and expertise includes international relations, diplomacy, international politics, East Asian studies. So he has a degree from Free University, also Tbilisi State University. Now he's pursuing his PhD studies at University of Georgia. I mentioned East Asian studies. He's an author of a book about Korea's economic success, and I hope one day we can discuss East Asia and Georgia on Talk Georgia.
Well, with great pleasure.
Okay, now let's get to the questions. And by the way, if you would like your questions to be answered on the next show, please send them to talkgeorgia1@gmail.com. You see email on the screen.
Also, do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe, because that is what helps Talk Georgia to grow.
Okay, so let's move to first question, which came from Levan, and it goes like this. Politicians are in jail, activists are in jail, NGOs and independent media are under siege. What's next? And how should we respond?
Okay, Giorgi, so you're starting hard. Nice. Well, situation is dire indeed. Situation is definitely not very optimistic if you look at it from the first glance. However, there are also indications which brighten the day a little bit and also bring a little bit of hope. If we consider and compare Georgia to Belarus, to Russia, to other authoritarian regimes, usually it takes the regime a very long time to build an authoritarian rule in a country. It's especially difficult in Georgia because here we do not have a very long tradition of Central Asian style authoritarian dictatorship, you know, because we had Shevardnadze, who with all his crimes and misdemeanors and all that he has done wrong, still he had a strategy. And this strategy included bringing Georgia closer to the West. So even if we could criticize Chevy for lots of problems when it came to internal policy, when it came to foreign politics and to foreign policy, he was definitely a visionary. And even in the times of Shevardnadze, there was a perception that yes, situation might be dire, situation might be bad, but Georgia was moving in the right direction. Right now, under Ivanishvili, this perception of Georgia moving in the right direction is slowly disappearing, and that's very dangerous, both for Georgia's future and also the whole politics and geopolitics of the entire region, because, as we know, Georgia is a gateway not only to the Caucasus, but also to Central Asia. Unless we get, extremely fast normalization of relations between Armenia and Turkey, which seems to be happening slowly, but steadily. Georgia still is a very important connection point for the West, towards the Caucasus, and also to Central Asia. And while we're talking about internal politics in Georgia, it's also important to note that geopolitics always have played a significant role. What we're witnessing right now is an attempt to replant the Central Asian style of governance in Georgia, to attack all political parties, to attack free media, civil society, and we've seen an attack on the civil society just yesterday with the leading CSOs receiving letters from the so-called Anti-Corruption Bureau, which is technically just a political police of the regime, which is trying to subdue and eliminate any voices that are in disagreement with the Georgian nightmare and their policies. So, yes, we do have challenges, but if we look at these challenges and at the actions of the Georgian dream, it's not a show of strength, you know. GD is doing it because they're desperate. They know very well that they're losing support among the Georgian public. They know very well that their propaganda has limits. And they know very well the Georgian public, even the conformist parts of it, who are still aligning themselves with the Georgian dream, do not want to go to Grozno, Kislovodsk, or other Russian cities for holidays. They want to go to Paris. They want to go to Milano. So that's why a combination of international pressure with local political process is something that we're witnessing now. And Georgian dream is obviously in a hurry. They're trying to eliminate any dissent as long and as soon as possible, because otherwise they know that they will not be able to stay in power for long. So it's kind of a race between the Georgian society, which is Western-minded, which is pro-democracy, and the Georgian dream. Who will be able to outlast this marathon? Who will be able not to break under pressure? And Georgian Dream is trying to break the society. They're trying to break the neck of media. They're trying to break the neck of civil society. They're introducing more and more and more draconian laws, which are a sign of despair. So right now, I believe we need to overcome this. We need to keep the fight. And again, this desperation and this rush is something that indicates that the regime is not as coherent and strong and powerful as it wants to be perceived.
Partly I agree with you, but I wouldn't compare Shevardnadze's time and Shevardnadze's style with Bidzina's ruling style. I think this is entirely different. Also, you said that the regime is not strong enough and coherent enough, but it is strong enough to keep going. So this is what we have to face. Right. So my take on this is that, again, as you mentioned, there is an attack on political leaders. Half of them are in prison. Another half is awaiting to be in prison. And I think the next week, I think we will see the end of the drama here, because the Georgian Dream either have to jail them all or release them all. And I think this is the dilemma they are facing, because if they release them on all, then it would be seen as weakness, and it could deliver a blow to the regime. But if they lock them up all, that would be another step of the consolidation of dictatorship that would generate extra waves of pressure from the West. Again, you mentioned what is going on with the NGO sector and CSOs. There is an attack on them, an attempt to implement this FARA and the other Russian laws at the same time. We have new Mzia Amaghlobeli. Nino Datashvili was jailed a few days ago for allegedly assaulting civil servant or bailiff in the courtroom. And then she's facing up to 7 years in prison. And she's just a teacher, and she didn't really assault anyone. She was just protecting herself in a brawl in the courtroom. the television stations are attacked because I think yesterday or the day before yesterday there was going on a hearing in Communications Commission when the Commission is trying to put pressure on TVs, critically minded TVs, on using certain terms like the regime and the regime's court and etc., etc. So I would say this is a regime is attacking almost all aspects of public life at the same time and trying to get the full domination of it. Okay, to answer the second part of the question that Levan sent us, how should we respond? The reason I kind of gave this background to the audience is that I think the situation is not dire, but indeed very serious. And we are witnessing very fast consolidation of autocracy in a very fast pace. This didn't happen in Russia this way. This didn't happen in Belarus this way. It was kind of the gradual consolidation in those countries. Now, here in Georgia, we are facing, something slightly different, but it's a very happening. It's very fast. As for how should we respond to this, I think that what we have to think here carefully: who are we? So, okay. It's political parties, it's civil society organizations, it's just active people like we are, or it's people on Rustaveli Avenue who are protesting. It's already more than 200 days. Is it international players, Georgia's partners? Okay, we contains many players. So, and I think that the good response and efficient response would be that if these players at least coordinate.
Well, first of all, I wanted to interrupt you for a second because I don't think that all the viewers are absolutely familiar with why the political leaders are in jail right now. And I think we need to explain a little bit about this Sulkiani Commission because that's a very indicative image of what Georgian Dream is trying to achieve. The Sulkiani Commission in Parliament was created in violation of Georgia's constitution. Even if we put aside the question of the election itself, any investigative commission in Georgian Parliament is supposed to have opposition representatives. The Sulkiani Commission has 0 opposition representatives, and the Georgian Dream decided to allocate MPs from their own party as artificial opposition to join that commission, which is a violation of Georgian constitution if we look at it from a very strict perspective. So the political leaders are being jailed because they refuse to come to an anti-constitutional commission, which is hilarious if we look at it from a legal perspective. That's a very basic violation of both the spirit and the code of Georgian constitution. And Georgian Dream does not care. They're trying to weaponize both legal system and the constitution and all the state institutions against their own people. So that's something that is going on here with the political leaders, and that's why I think it's always important to explain to the viewers why this commission is actually illegitimate and illegal, even from a purely legal perspective. A commission without opposition, that's not how it works. That's not how it is supposed to be working. And yet, Georgian Dream is trying to push this narrative. Now, when it comes to the political prisoners, of course, I think we need to express our solidarity to all of them, and also to the civil society organizations, which are currently under attack by the regime. Again, I strongly believe that it is a sign of the desperation of this regime, which is trying to rush and transform Georgia into a Central Asian dictatorship at a very short term, which, as you mentioned, is something not as it happened in, for example, Russia, or even in Belarus, where we had a full crackdown on civil society and dictatorial policies that have been going on for a very, very long time. If we're talking about the political process in Georgia, though, and what we are supposed to be doing, I don't think I'll be I'll be something new. I don't think I'll be able to say something new on this. We all know that to fight an authoritarian regime, you need three different aspects. Aspect number one, political process, which includes and is combined of political parties, what they're doing, if you want to add civil society, spice things up with some other stuff. But the most important thing is political process and what the parties are doing. Second one is external pressure, and we have seen unprecedented pressure from the European Union, which, by the way, is not enough. And the fact that we have not seen European Union sanctions is an indication of inability of the EU itself to achieve very basic foreign policy goals. And the third one is the people who are protesting, who, despite all those fines, are not yet broken, and who are continuing the fight. I sometimes compare the situation in Georgia to a big box which is expecting a spark to recreate the huge protests we have seen. So that's why right now, from these three components, I think the biggest challenge is political process, because out of four main opposition political parties, we do not have a strategic agreement on how and what they want to achieve. We have two political parties, the United National Movement, together with their allies. We have and Coalition for Georgia, who do not want to participate in the local elections, and they decided to boycott them. And at the same time, we also have Lela for Georgia and For Georgia, the two parties, one of them led by Mamuka Hazaradze.
Giorgi, let me interrupt you here. So I think that we have a question about the local elections. So I mean, when we read out, we can just move to that. Well, do you mind reading out next question, which came from Lena?
The European Parliament passed a strong resolution on Mzia Amaghlobeli and the state of media freedom in Georgia. So why isn't the EU taking action? Why isn't it using all its leverage to hold Ivanishvili and his allies accountable? That's a brilliant question.
I think you started answering that question already.
Indeed. We partially responded to it. First of all, the European Union is a body which takes a decision by consensus. Since we have Mr. Orban there, who is definitely a Trojan horse within the EU from any perspective, it's very difficult to have pan-European or European Union sanctions on Ivanishvili or any of his cronies. Partially, again, it is a problem of the EU itself, because the fact that one of the world's most powerful geopolitical unions has not been able to transform itself into a geopolitical actor and deal with very basic issue of sanctioning dictators or wannabe dictators in its own neighborhood in an EU candidate country is, of course, a problem and a challenge of the European Union itself. I mean, what are we talking about? Are we talking about a, trade bloc, or are we talking about a geopolitical actor which is able to project power? If the European Union wants to become an actual geopolitical actor, in that case, Georgia, Serbia, even Belarus are litmus tests for the European Union's foreign policy. Whether or not the EU itself is able to achieve very basic, and in Georgian case, I think it's absolutely the easiest case for the European Union, because absolute majority of the population is EU-minded. And even though the Georgian dream is immensely gaslighting the population and trying to spread anti-Western, absolutely anti-democratic narratives, they're not very successful. The population is still very much pro-EU, and the Georgian Dream Party, even now, is still trying to gaslight the public as if they are a pro-Western, pro-EU power. So for the EU itself, Georgia is a relatively easy example where they can actually project power if they wanted so, but they have not been able to because of Mr. Orban and also his allies in Slovakia. So at this point of time, the biggest challenge why the EU is slightly incoherent in its approaches towards Georgia, which is the European Parliament with very strong wording, very powerful messages, and then we see the Commission level, which is not able to make any decisive actions because Hungary is actually blocking them. So I think that's the answer. European Union partially needs to realize that it is a geopolitical actor. In the current situation, in the current geopolitical environment, European Union has only two choices: to transform itself and become an actual geopolitical actor which is able to project power, or slowly go into the abyss and slightly disappear from the world stage.
Okay, I agree with you, George, and I see that Lena is disappointed here, and I'm disappointed too about EU's actions, because it's been already quite a lot of time. But I think that we all need to understand that European Union is not a country. It's a bloc of 27 countries, and hopefully soon it will be more. And sadly, if we wouldn't be able to push out Ivanishvili's regime, Georgia wouldn't be part of this enlargement. Also, we need to bear in mind, I'm talking to Lena here, that European Union has three distinct bodies that run European Union. That's Parliament, Council, and the Commission. And sometimes there is not necessarily, sometimes these three actors are not acting as one voice. Indeed, it was a very strong resolution about Mzia Amaghlobeli and state of media in Georgia. They are demanding unconditional release of Mzia and dropping all the charges, and I mean, all repressions should stop and all draconian laws should be repealed, and etc., etc. And the parliament calls on the commission and the council to put sanctions on Ivanishvili and his allies. But in practice, it is a bit difficult for the European Union to act. And as you mentioned, okay, if the European Union wants to be a geopolitical player, they need to transform themselves. But I think we should, I mean, if we are waiting when European Union gets itself transformed, it will take quite a lot of time. So I think that what we need to do, and what I think that we are lacking here, is the proper lobbying. Because, look, when the issues are very important for the European Union, they normally manage to take decisions pretty quickly. So a good example is Ukraine, good example is, for example, now Iran, when European Union countries, well, at least the top of them, are talking to the Iranian officials about how to, put them on the negotiating table, etc. And you mentioned Orban. Yes, Orban is a black sheep of the European Union, and he's trying to block a lot of decisions. But when it comes to Russian sanctions, for example, the other European leaders are able to persuade him to withdraw his opposition, right? The same could be said about the other important issues. So what we need to do is to make Georgian case as important that the European leaders pressurize Orban to get the consensus about, putting sanctions on Ivanishvili and his cronies and with the other issues. Also, one thing that needs to be mentioned here is that what European Union needs to realize that if they want Georgia to be, well, a democracy, or if they want Georgia to be part of European Union in the future, I think they need to hurry up here, and they need to put all their leverage that they have in action. Because if they don't do it now, and if the Georgian dream will have space to adapt, they will adapt to literally anything. If visa-free travel is stopped at some point, and I think it is going to happen at some point, before that, if Georgian dream has time, they will adapt to it. If free trade stops at some point, and it is going to be stopped if Georgian dream continues the policies that they pursue, they will manage to adapt to it. So it is important that if there is no consensus in the European Union, at least member states will try to put their own sanctions, their own leverage in place, because time is not working in favor of democracy in Georgia. It is working against democracy. And unless things are done quickly, I don't think it will make much sense either to stop visa-free or stop free trade or stop euro transactions or stop anything, right? So, all in all, yes, I am also very much disappointed by the sluggish response from the European Union to the Georgian crisis, but I also understand basically better than anyone that the European Union is such an organization that is not, it is functioning on a consensus and things are done slowly. One thing is also worth mentioning that even no matter what Georgian Dream does, and we see what Georgian Dream is doing now, they still keep saying that we want to be part of the European Union.
Yeah,
we want to be part of that
different
on our
European
own
Union
terms, obviously, but yeah, by 2030, whatever, we will be more than ready to be part of it. But I mean, the point what I want to make is that because of, and you mentioned this popularity of the EU. Okay, Georgian Dream is working hard to decline this popularity as much as possible, but it is still very dangerous now to come out and say that we no longer want European Union. But this is getting prepared. And I think that two things needs to be done. First is that absolute domination of any aspect of public life. Means that the controlling of political parties, controlling of CSOs, controlling of media, controlling of every aspect of public life. And second, okay, just to unleash the propaganda, anti-European, anti-Western propaganda as it is going now, and wait before this process of brainwashing reaches the point when it's almost kind of 50-50 or 60-40 ratio. After that, I think that Georgian Dream will be ready and they will simply announce that we are no longer interested in the EU, we are no longer interested in whatever. I mean, they already said that about NATO, and Georgia will be a sovereign, democracy and the Russian background. And this is why I'm saying that needs to be done quickly. Yeah. The European Union needs to act quickly because this will happen within a year or two.
Yeah, I'm calling it Serbization or Moldovization of Georgia, if you want. When the ruling party is trying to transform a society which is 80+% pro-European into a 50-50 society. And they're trying to do it at a very fast pace. And when we're talking about GD's integration into the EU, let's not forget that GD is pushing the idea of different Europe. Apparently, that's the Europe of Alternative für Deutschland, that's the Europe of Orban and Europe of Fico. So what the GD is trying to do is they're trying to create this, I'm jokingly calling them unholy trinity of European political parties that are anti-European within the EU, and they're openly aligning themselves, for example, with the AfD, which is a political party that went to Abkhazia to, brackets, observe elections there. And that's such tragic comedy, I would say, where that Georgian ruling party is trying to align itself with the most pro-Russian, most anti-European forces within the EU, that it is very hard to comment on this from a political or politological perspective. That seems to be something that doctors need to take care of, honestly.
Okay, let's move to the next question that came from Samanta. And what she's interested in is this. There is an intense debate over whether opposition parties should take part in the upcoming local elections. What's your view? Why are some parties calling for a boycott while others insist on staying in the race? Do you want to start answering that?
I mean, if you want my honest answer, I don't care. No, seriously. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't care whether or not the parties participate as long, and here comes the main part, as it is a common decision of all the main players. What we're witnessing right now is an absolutely unbelievable miscoordination between the main opposition parties. Two parties want to participate, two parties don't want to participate. The president's platform urges them not to participate. Civil society is different on these topics, but still. So the problem right now is that we are missing a strategic coordination for the very important issue. Both participation and boycott can be justified, but it has to be a common strategic decision. And the problems that we have right now is exactly the lack of this strategy. The parties are repeating a mistake of Turkey, if you wish. Exactly the same challenges, same problems that opposition has in Turkey. Georgian opposition is repeating them at an unbelievable scale. So that's why I would say it does not actually matter whether or not they participate in the local elections, as long as it is a common decision by all the players. The worst scenario, the worst possible outcome is when half of the opposition participates, half does not.
Exactly.
And that's unfortunately exactly where we're headed at this point.
Right. I more than agree, basically. I think the strategic aim is to push Ivanishvili's regime out. Well, that's the aim, okay? So whatever you do, participate in the elections or boycott it or do something else, should serve the main purpose, okay? And the main purpose is exactly that. We need to change the regime, okay? So I think that the parties need to ask themselves before they make final decisions whether to participate or not to participate. Well, their actions, is it helping, pushing Bidzina out of power, or the other way around? Yeah, as you mentioned, there are three theoretical options, basically. Either all of the parties boycott, or all of the parties participate, or
The worst.
the worst possible scenario is that some participate and some boycott. This scenario is, I think, being unfolding for now. So what we see now is that, again, part of the opposition is in favor of participating, and part of the opposition is in favor of boycotting. Also, the question that needs to be answered is this. Okay, these elections that is coming, the local elections, is it going to be a better elections than the elections that was there in 2024, when, the Ivanishvili basically usurped power? So, if you take a look at the new laws on elections, they amended once, things are getting worse. In terms of international observers, nobody will be here. For example, Rukhadze himself said that there is no need for OSCE and ODIHR observer mission to be here, because they normally don't observe local elections. But the facts speak absolutely differently, and in 2017, I think it was, in 2021, the OSCE mission was present in Georgia. So again, this also needs to be taken into consideration, that what leverage, if you take part in the elections, you have to protect your votes and to win the elections. And if you have no chance of winning, then I don't understand what's the idea of going. Is it participation that matters?
I think Pierre de Coubertin would be very happy with this definition. But okay, let's do a bit of mental gymnastics here. Let's imagine that we have a strategic agreement between all the parties, and in that case we have two scenarios: to boycott or to go into the election. If the parties decide to go to the elections, then I have two questions to them. Question number one: what happens when Georgian Dream rigs the election? That's number one. And second, even deeper mental gymnastics, let's imagine that the opposition wins, let me say Tbilisi, for example. Will it be a big enough political blow to the Georgian Dream or not? That's number one. And number two, what happens when we have an opposition mayor and Georgian Dream simply cuts off Tbilisi budget? I'm not even talking about Istanbul's mayor's scenario when they can simply arrest the mayor in a couple of months. So
Well, they can do that too.
obviously,
But yeah.
no, I'm not even mentioning that scenario. Let's say that they just cut the budget of Tbilisi and eliminate it entirely. What happens then? So unless we have some basic answers from the opposition parties on this, it's very difficult to evaluate. Also considering, if you remember, it was not the rigged election that caused mass protests in October. It was Kobakhi's statement that they are halting Georgia's European integration. So the biggest challenge right now is will or will not the opposition be able to mobilize and motivate their supporters, who are a majority in this country, by the way, to defend their votes. Ivanishvili in 2012, he did a very good job, if you remember. I don't think that our viewers know this episode of Georgian politics, but there was a so-called PANS conspiracy in 2012 election.
Right, yeah, I remember.
When the Georgian Dream was promoting a conspiracy theory that the PANs used by the Central Election Commission in 2012 were somehow disappearing. The ink was somehow disappearing. And that's why they asked their supporters to come to the polling stations with their own PANs. Now, that conspiracy theory was not implemented simply to, make people crazy. It was an attempt to mobilize their own supporters and to create a perception that United National Movement wanted to rig the election so that people were prepared to act after that. The opposition did not do it in 2012, even vice versa. The main communication line was that the GD would not be able to rig the election. So that's why when the election got rigged, the people were not prepared. So the question is, how can opposition prepare the people this time?
Okay.
So yeah, I have these questions. Maybe you could invite somebody from the politicians and ask it to them. But let's see.
I will.
Let's keep the questions open.
Yeah, and one more question is, I think that needs to be answered, is that why does GD want opposition parties to participate? So,
well, that's an easy one, Georgi. You don't need opposition
I know it
parties
is an
here.
easy one, but I know it's an easy one, but I think it needs to be answered because for some of the people to understand, what kind of trap is that? What Georgian Dream is trying to do is just to normalize the regime, get some kind of recognition, and most importantly, create systemic opposition out of the political spectrum. Systemic opposition means that if they go into this game, they will be attached to the Georgian Dream forever. Something very similar to what is happening in Russia for the past decade, basically. Because what Georgian is trying to do is that and if part of the opposition participates, the other part boycotts, the boycotting part would be marginalized, and the other part that cooperates would be turned into a systemic opposition. So this is what Georgian Dream is trying to do. And I think that all the opposition players need to realize that even those who want to be part of this game, that the Ivanishvili is making a systemic opposition out of them, and they will have no political prospects whatever after that.
When we're talking about systemic opposition, I always love to bring the example of Yabloko in Russia. A political party, a liberal political party with pretty strong, coherent liberal values, which made a choice to become a systemic opposition party. Where are they now? Nowhere. So that's the future of any opposition party, legitimate opposition party, which decides to sign a contract with the devil. They will simply disappear, and they will be swallowed, used, and then dropped away.
Okay, let's move to the next question. Do you want to read it out?
Of course, Giorgi. So the final question, in your opinion, how might the Israel-Iran conflict end? Oh my. Are we currently at risk, and how could this impact us in the future? Okay.
You studied in Haifa University, so...
Yes, I did, and
will you be willing to start that? Because, that's $1 million question. At least first part of it, so how might the Israel-Iran conflict end? I don't think it will end so anytime soon. Maybe this operation or outbreak of the war can end within a few weeks. May not, I don't know. But conflict? Well, it's possible, but how probable is that?
Well, yes, indeed. You mentioned that I said in Haifa, true, and it broke my heart to see Haifa under attack by the ballistic missiles and civilian infrastructure, which was also under attack. It's all, of course, absolutely devastating. When it comes to the conflict itself, I don't want to dig very deep into it because there are lots of different things that are changing, and it's absolutely possible that by the time that this podcast actually airs, situation will be absolutely different from what we're witnessing right now.
So it will be aired tomorrow, so I don't think it will be radically changed.
You never know, Giorgi, you never know. I mean, what we're expecting right now is probably an attack on the Firdo nuclear center in Iran. So we don't know what will happen. We don't know if the American aviation will do it. We don't know if the bunker bombs will be used. So that's why it's very difficult to predict anything. And again, situation might change overnight, actually. So, but when it comes to Georgia and the Caucasus, I mean, first of all, Georgia does not have a direct border with Iran. So that's something which is not that bad at this point of time. But Armenia does. And it will be a very big challenge for Armenia right now because Iran has been playing a balancing role for Azerbaijan in the region. And Armenia has been trying to have very good relations with Iran, first of all because they hoped to somehow contain influence of both Azerbaijan and Turkey through Iran. Now this balancing act is over. Iran is not a player in the Caucasus for the time being, at least. And also, the second point, which I find interesting for Georgia right now, is the so-called 3+3 notorious format, which is right now absolutely out of the table because of what happened in Iran. Now, it's out of the game again. And I think that's probably a good thing right now because it removes ability from the Georgian dream to promote this north-south corridor, which they have been trying to push for a very, very long time. So from that perspective, situation is getting more difficult for the Georgia's ruling party because they have been openly allying themselves with Iran and Russia, and they have been visiting funerals in Iran, etc., etc. So from this perspective, definitely it's getting much more difficult for the Georgian
somehow
dream.
I don't hear supportive statements from Kobakhidze today, so is
yeah, I mean,
scared?
the only statements that we've seen was from the MFA, and it was like, we call on all parties to demonstrate constraint, which is a very diplomatic way to put it, and I'm very surprised that there are still people at the MFA who can write a statement like this, but still. Yeah, so from Georgia's perspective, first of all, the downfall of the 3+3 format is definitely a good thing. On the other hand, when Israel will be able to achieve its objectives in Iran, it will be a very clear blow to the Georgian dream's propaganda because Israel is openly allying itself with the United States, with the European Union, while Georgia, and under the Georgian dream, has not been doing that. So, a very easy question. What is better, to be ally of the US and Europe or of Russia and Iran? And I think that question will be answered very vividly and is being answered right now by Israel very obviously. So that's why I think it's absolutely obvious that this conflict is a very big blow to the Georgian dream. And if we look at all those statements that have been made by the propagandists of the Georgian dream, for example, Shatirishvili has called Iran a Platonian state, which is absolutely insane. It's absolutely obvious where the Georgian dreams, which side the Georgian dream is trying to put itself on. And that's definitely, unfortunately, not the side of the West. And also, if we look a little bit, if we do a little bit of a zoom out, and we look at the statements from Russia, we can also see very obviously Putin was very direct when he said that Iran and Russia are fighting the same enemy. And now comes the question, if Iran and Russia are fighting the same enemy, which enemy is fighting Georgian dream?
spot on question.
Yeah, I'm not going to answer it. Maybe let's our viewers answer it.
Okay. Yeah, just to add, what I see in, I would say in short run, I only see two options happening in Iran. One is that the mullah regime is significantly weakened if it sustains itself, and will be brought to the negotiating table with a very limited options, in a very bad situation, and probably they will have to say no to their nuclear ambitions and etc. etc. The second option is that again Israel achieves its goal, neutralizing nuclear option plus changing regime.
And you know, both these options work out for Georgia, because there is absolutely no regime which will come in Iran that will be so close to Moscow as the regime of Ayatollahs.
Absolutely. So, and in both scenarios, both scenarios are, I would say, devastating for Georgian dream. So, of course, I mean, on its own, it can't change anything, but it will be very strong indication that sustaining a regime while being Russian ally or Iranian ally and the ally of this axis of evil is not that easy, right? And particularly when you have resistance inside the country.
You know, there has been a very funny anecdote in Georgian Dreams propaganda. You know that they have been trying to portray themselves as a continuation of King Herakles II, and so on and so forth. And there was a joke on Facebook that the people who consider themselves continuation of King Herakles' struggle suddenly love Iran. Yeah. And his main enemy
goes to the Shah Abbas I's grave and shedding tears.
Exactly. So yeah, that's an anecdote which also demonstrates how unbelievable the gaslighting and propaganda of the Georgian dream has become. And another element which demonstrates it, you know, it's very Orwellian. Austrasia has been fighting Eurasia and so on and so on. So in our case, for the last couple of months, German ambassador Peter Fischer was the main target of Georgian Dreams propaganda. He was the deep state embodied. And then suddenly we have Narishkin's statement about the United Kingdom, and Georgian Dreams propaganda changes its wheels 100%, and now the British ambassador, Garrett, is the main propaganda topic. So yeah, that's also demonstrating how desperate the propaganda is right now.
Okay, I think I agree with you that it's kind of just 24-hour reaction mode that they are in. But I think that time is against us. We need to finish it here, George. So thank you very much for being on the show. Thanks for watching us. Thanks for listening to us. Like us, subscribe to us, and I'll see you next week.